recording this session for those who couldn't make it today. Welcome everybody to our February MTPD. This is an initiative brought to you by the USEA Induction and Professional Development Working Group. It is a forum for master teachers by master teachers. So my dog is adding commentary. Where we are going to every month, the last Friday of the month, give a platform for master teachers to share topics that they are passionate about with their peers. So without further ado, I am delighted to introduce our February speaker, Yoland Kirkpatrick. She is a clinical faculty member at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I believe the VolsTeach, is that correct?
It is.
Great. She supports the field experiences of undergraduate, post-baccalaureate, and job-embedded math and science aspiring and pre-service teachers while teaching courses for teacher education and the VolsTeach program. Dr. Kirkpatrick has worked in urban and rural communities with AmeriCorps, Children's Defense Fund, Project Grad, and TRIO programs. And today we have the absolute pleasure to have her speak to us about redefining culturally relevant praxis through wholeness and community engagement. So, Dr. Kirkpatrick, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is, apologize for that, is culturally relevant praxis, being able to describe that individually and in the ways that it's described out there in the literature or maybe on the internet, and also how these descriptions can help us support the wholeness of our students and they supporting the wholeness of their students. And by one of the ways that we can redefine culturally relevant praxis also is thinking about community engagement, and how that's another description that we can give culturally relevant praxis. So one of the books or conversations, I would say, that further sparked my interest in this topic is In Search of Wholeness, African American Teachers and Their Culturally Specific Classroom Practices. And I think what stood out more to me is just teachers having these conversations, and that I began to have this dialogue with myself. I began to explore it more, and in thinking about ways that I could explore this topic with my own students, such as courses such as Knowing and Learning. And then just beginning to engage either with my peers here at UT or with practicing teachers out there, our alumni, about having these conversations about what is culturally relevant praxis. For the conversation today, it's not really about developing a consensus about what culturally relevant praxis is, but maybe to begin to, within ourselves or as a group, talk about the ways by which we describe it, so that at least we feel like we're having a conversation about the same topic. But again, whatever perspectives that I'm presenting today or ways by which I think is useful to describe culturally relevant praxis isn't meant to provide a consensus, but just interesting ways by which we can think about this topic as being another learning theory to inform teaching and learning. So I found it interesting that if I was to do a Google search on culturally relevant praxis, and maybe you would do the very same thing, it's interesting about what is highlighted. At the very same time, it's interesting to me about what I think might be missing from it as well. And so I had lots of aha moments about what was highlighted, and maybe through our conversation today, maybe there's additional descriptions that we can add to this conversation about culturally relevant praxis. So starting with some of the aha moments, or at least descriptions that I came across, it is a way by which to integrate, include students' own cultural tools and cultural knowledge. There was lots of descriptions that talk about students' prior experiences. Social justice might have been a description that was included as well. High expectations with empathy and compassion, a safe space that is brain-based, that this is a way by which teaching and learning, by which students are not passive recipients of ideas in mathematics or science, and that they very much are active inquirers or self-instructors. And that these are some of the conversations and observations and aha moments that others are having. And I found this information via literature searches and conversations simply that teachers are having on their blog sites or tweets that they're sending out there in terms of this conversation of culturally relevant praxis. So, like I said, one of the books that got me thinking more about this topic stood out to me because I love hearing teachers talk. Love hearing teachers talk about theories or their experiences. And so that also got me out there talking to classroom teachers. And so one of the conversations that came about is, who is Norm? And I think that this is an important conversation because with culturally relevant praxis, I think that that's part of why it's so critical for us. It gets us away from norm, whoever norm is, whatever norm is, and how that might be represented. And so this particular teacher said, oh, we've got to teach to the norm, as in that was the instructions that she interpreted, that she gets about her own teaching. And so her question aloud to me is, well, who is norm? I mean, who are we to define as this? And so I thought that was, in my asking her about her own definitions and descriptions about culturally relevant praxis, that was her response to me. And that culturally relevant praxis had her to ask the question, well, who is norm? And whatever assumptions or presumptions that teachers are given about the nature of what their STEM teaching should look and feel like, okay, and who that student is. So why wholeness? Oftentimes when we are having our students to think about instruction or planning or that classroom environment, or when we have them to think about these learning theories, one of the things that I wanted to begin to do in my own teaching with my own aspiring teachers or my work with alumni is getting them to think about the whole student. And one of the reasons why I also use that description is I had a former teacher who's now in the classroom who loves to draw. And one of the things that she always would do is she would always draw someone without a face. And so to me, thinking about students, whether it's my own students, our own students, and them thinking about their own students is to put that face on the drawing and to think about the wholeness. And so I think one of the opportunities with culturally relevant praxis, if I was to add my own descriptions onto the internet, is that it is teaching to the wholeness. And some ways to think about that is that it does involve SEL, the social and emotional selves of our students. That's an opportunity that culturally relevant praxis gives us. It makes us think about our students' sense of belonging. And when I say our students, I am thinking not only of aspiring teachers that I am working with and knowing and learning or in the field, but I'm also thinking about our alumni as well. The sense of belonging that our students have, and how we will lose students so often in middle school from our STEM pipelines because they don't have a sense of belonging. They don't see themselves as mathematicians and scientists. And I think that culturally relevant praxis or rethinking the STEM classroom, how it feels, how it sounds, that it gives us opportunities to also explicitly address that as well. A growth mindset of our students, and also culturally relevant praxis opens up the doors for cultural and community knowledge, that there's different ways of knowing when it comes with regards to math and science. So with culturally relevant praxis, I hope that there's less comments from students such as the one that you see on the screen there. I remember from schooling experience that I hated my biology class because it felt like a whole bunch of dead facts that had no application to anything, and thus I remember very little from that class. And I think that, again, when we talk about that wholeness and that sense of belonging, different ways of understanding math and science, that growth mindset, I think that culturally relevant praxis will give students it will allow them to see that STEM is contextual, the teaching and the learning of that. And we're going to dig more into that as well. And also, I think that culturally relevant praxis allows opportunities such as these empathy maps. And if you would just give me a moment, this video is about 2 minutes, and I want to show it because, again, I think that it is one explicit way or practical way by which to think about culturally relevant praxis. And so please let me know if the volume, if you're unable to hear the video. Is everyone able to hear the video, at least to start of? Okay. And I'll also turn on.
An empathy map is a simple visual tool that educators can use to connect with their students. Empathy mapping is used for building relationships and to make better instructional decisions based on the needs of our kids. Empathy maps are typically divided into sections with a representation of a student in the center. Each section helps us to learn more about our students. Interests and goals are things that they like sports, music. It's important to know their interests and goals so we can connect something that they love to something in the curriculum. Examples of assets are areas of strength, like fluency in a language. They're a good listener, they're a systems thinker, or they've mastered a specific skill. Academic needs are the areas that our students need to improve in. If I'm an English language arts teacher, the ability to interpret informational text. If I'm a math teacher, unit conversion or proportional reasoning. SEL needs are skill sets that relate to self and also others. These include self-awareness, social awareness, and also responsible decision-making. Career needs are soft skills like communication, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, skills that we know that our young people need now, but also in the future. Traditional ways of collecting information can be through polls, surveys, and looking at their work. But knowledge of students can also be gleaned in classroom discussions, paying attention to what they care about, recognizing their gifts and abilities, and in things that they voluntarily talk about. Empathy maps can be used to make instructional decisions, such as appropriate scaffolds, differentiation, and themes of projects or lessons. They can also be used to co-design learning experiences around what matters most to students. I have found the empathy mapping process extremely useful for determining where I need to become more socially and culturally competent regarding the students that I serve. Think of the student who needs you the most and start there.
So that particular video stands out to me for a number of reasons. I love the description, empathy mapping, in terms of thinking about the strengths, the needs, the assets of students. And I think it also represents a number of critical ideas that are enveloped in culturally relevant praxis as well. And so I imagine that if I'm in knowing and learning, for example, and we're talking about behaviorism, or we're talking about social constructivist theory, that we always get our students to think about what are the critical ideas of that theory. How does that reflect best practices? How does that teaching look? And so I think that the empathy mapping and some of the ideas that were displayed in that video could very well be ways that we can introduce our students to some of the big ideas that culturally relevant praxis will introduce to their teaching. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Play it again. Continue with another big idea. So I said that one of the key ideas in my particular title was community engagement. And again, this is a way by which to add another description, another way of thinking about culturally relevant praxis. And so with community engagement, I think what this says about culturally relevant praxis is that this is a way of teaching and learning that is collaborative, that the community needs, their strengths are very much a focus. And also it gets us out of the echo chamber of how we may often teach and present STEM. And so that's, I think, a lot about what this community engagement piece might say about what culturally relevant praxis is. What else I think going to that one of the descriptions that's often connected with culturally relevant praxis is that social justice. And so one of my favorite educators, Marian Wright Edelman, wanted to share a quote of hers that I often use and like to refer to, and that education is for improving the lives of others and for leaving your community and world better than you found it. And in some ways, that's what culturally relevant, that may be an objective, a goal, maybe of culturally relevant praxis that we can present to our students. And so I just wanted to share that particular quote there. And I think also that emphasizes that component of that community engagement. I'm going to give you a moment. Don't often like to have long quotes or long pieces of information on a slide presentation, but I wanted you to read this. And again, it's about this conversation that teachers are having, even if the teacher is not calling it culturally relevant praxis. I think culturally relevant praxis will support our aspiring teachers and our alumni to have these moments where they are making these observations and they're asking these questions, even if they don't call it culturally relevant praxis or being responsive in that manner. But they're having these observations, these big observations. So I'll be quiet for a moment to allow you to read that particular quote from a teacher. And so when Marian Wright Edelman mentioned that education is for improving the lives of others, maybe we could put in there that culturally relevant praxis helps with that wholeness and improving the lives of others and supporting, again, our aspiring teachers, our alumni, to have these moments. And again, they may not be able to put a learning theory to it, but they are at least having these deep moments here, this introspection. And so when I think about culturally relevant praxis, and I think about ways by which I can communicate what it is, and maybe get my students to think about what opportunities will present itself in their classroom through this lens. I think about the strengths, the assets, the opportunities, and the resources by looking at math and science instruction through this particular lens. And so some descriptions that stand out to me is care and intentionality, that learning and teaching is contextual, that there are connections, and that we embrace and value that, that native language, ethnicity, gender, and that we see that STEM is not neutral. There's history to it. There's cultural, there's social constructs to it. It's very much cultural, and that it does not, and is very much a not teacher focus or textbook focus, but is very much a learning experience or teaching that that's two-way, and is from teacher to student, and is from the classroom to the local communities as well. And so I think that this graphic organizer is a way by which to maybe think about culturally relevant praxis, and also the opportunities that it lends itself to our STEM classrooms as well. And they're teachers that want to do this. Again, they may not have a specific language by which they are calling it, but teachers very much, as Nancy does in this particular quote, share a pride in the relationships and connections that she has made and will continue to make and wants to make with her students, and sees it very much as a part of her mission as a teacher. Another description that I would give culturally relevant praxis is that it's place-based. So there is that community piece, and that it is not just from teacher to student or whatever resources are contained within that classroom, but we also see that it is a connection, that it is information that students bring to the classroom as well, and that they are coming to the classroom with their own STEM understandings and community knowledge and experiences. But also that with culturally relevant praxis, we have the opportunities such as this program that you see on the screen here, Math of the Mountains. And it helps us as master teachers, it helps our own students to kind of think about what if students learn the mathematics of a place or the science of a place. And I think that that is another way by which we can look at culturally relevant praxis and the opportunities that it gives us. So along with behaviorism and meaningful learning and whatever learning theories we are introducing or reintroducing to our students, culturally relevant praxis is another way about thinking about teaching and learning mathematics. And it incorporates all the big ideas that we want our students to shoot for: application, transfer of knowledge, context, etc. And you can see with a program such as Math of the Mountains, which may not have described itself as being culturally relevant praxis, but very much is an example of what culturally relevant praxis could be and is. Continuing with other descriptions. And other descriptions that I would add if there was a Wikipedia page for culturally relevant praxis, that is student-driven. And so you would look at this and you would say, well, those don't seem like brand new ideas. No, they're not necessarily brand new ideas, but it allows us to kind of think about what culturally relevant praxis could be, and why it could be a critical piece to add to our classes and getting our students to think about some more. And I think that they're already thinking about it, even if they don't have descriptions for it. So culturally relevant praxis is student driven. It's a way of humanizing STEM. It is looking at different ways of knowing. It allows opportunities to be interdisciplinary, hands-on, lots of experiences for students in that manner. It's engaging and it's very much community-centered as well. And so with culturally relevant praxis, you know, one of the ways by which I guess you could summarize this particular graphic when asking the question what STEM looks like, it's students having a sense of themselves, their communities, and their place in the world. And I think that, you know, many of us may be familiar with the study where, and they continue to collect this data, where students are asked to draw images of what a scientist or a mathematician looks like. And I think that this would expand, it would actually give a face to those descriptions. And I also think that those faces may very much look like them or those in their communities versus someone that they are not familiar with and someone that looks, you know, oftentimes every picture I often see sometimes with young people would draw of a scientist somehow looks to me like Albert Einstein. But I think that, you know, once they begin to see STEM through this particular lens, STEM might look like that person at their farmer's market or at the barber shop, and that they will see that science and technology and engineering mathematics is very much who they are and very much a part of their own communities as well. Part of, and I've continued to do this work with myself, making the invisible visible and continuing to have this dialogue with myself and with teachers. Again, my aspiring teachers, our aspiring teachers, with alumni, with teachers in the classroom. And so that self-reflection piece, I think, is important for all of us, not just for our students. And so why is that self-reflection piece important? Again, I apologize for the long text on the screen, but we are all grappling, I think, with the same kinds of questions. And so for us not to feel as if we're by ourselves having these conversations. And so here, Nancy is sharing a conversation with me that she had with an intern. And again, we're all having these conversations, Nancy with her intern, Nancy with me. And so, and this particular quote sets up the transition that we're going to do next, and why self-reflection is so important. And so again, I'm going to be quiet to give you a moment to read this. So here's a conversation that Nancy's having with the intern. I also would like you to see this next piece as well. So this is Kelly describing her own experiences. And so culturally relevant praxis, I think, is, again, it is encouraging, it's supporting all of us, and that includes me. That includes the conversations that we will have with our aspiring teachers, with our alumni, with teachers out there already in the classroom, to have these self-reflective conversations with each other. And I think that culturally relevant praxis gives us that safe space to have these conversations, these challenging conversations. No shame, but just to have the conversations allowed as a group of teachers. And so what I would like us to do is, just as the intern, just as Kelly did about saying aloud when asked the question, or the topic is related to culturally relevant praxis, and they had those really difficult conversations with themselves, with someone else, I would like us for a moment to first start with the very first prompt there. Culturally relevant teaching to me is, and if you feel comfortable, maybe add that to our chat. And again, it's sometimes a challenging conversation to have, but I think that that's where it begins, is that reflection with ourselves and having those conversations then with our students or alumni or teachers in the classroom, because I think we're all thinking about it and grappling with it. And so again, no requirements to add to the chat, but maybe just kind of think about it individually. If you ask yourself, what is culturally relevant teaching to you? And then another part to think about is people who do culturally relevant teaching are. And how might you answer that? And again, no requirements to add that to the chat, but maybe nonetheless think about it. And that's some questions that I pose to myself, particularly when wanting to have those conversations with students and how we would broach those conversations. Okay, so different, okay, being aware of the student, okay, meeting students where they are, understanding the cultural background of students and embedding those connections, supporting students, making students feel accepted and valued along with their contributions, being curious, yes. And I think we've seen that in some of the stories that I place here as well. The strengths and backgrounds of our students, and also recognizing that it's an area where we need to grow and that we're trying to grow. And that's why asking questions such as this are important. And so in developing that wholeness of our students, okay, our students and they developing, growing the wholeness of their students. Part of that is also just thinking about our own lens, the beliefs and assumptions and experiences that we bring to the classroom, and having that conversation with ourselves is not an idea that's unique to me or one that I simply proposed by myself. But many of us may be familiar with Zaretta Hammond in her writings, in her work. And I love her description of what we may be seeking to be, or what culturally relevant praxis gives us an opportunity to be, is a texture teacher. And I love that. I love that description of me becoming a texture teacher, of me supporting my students in becoming a texture teacher. And I think that culturally relevant praxis, embedding that in our own UTeach courses and experiences that we provide our students, the work that we do with our alumni, for them to become a texture teacher, student driven, that their work is community centered, interdisciplinary, you know, and that there's this continuity of care of themselves and also their students as well. And so I think culturally relevant praxis opens up that door for us all to become texture teachers. And also with becoming a texture teacher as well, we see that that another critical component of the classroom environment, I think of the models and the rubrics that we provide our students in thinking about their instruction and their planning and the classroom environment that they're setting. And what I wish I could add to that is how is your teaching, your instruction, your planning, this classroom environment that you're developing, how is it also supporting a growth mindset? And I think that a culturally relevant praxis not only recognizes the growth mindset of our K-12 students and their sense of belonging in our classroom, but also I think that a culturally relevant praxis gets us as master teachers to think about our own mindset and what we're bringing to the classroom and what messages that we are sending as well. So I think that that's very much related to that developing our own being a textured teacher, which the culturally relevant praxis opens us up to be. So the questions that I have here are some prompts that I thought about that when I teach knowing and learning again, and we're talking about culturally relevant praxis, maybe these are some prompts that I'll give my students. Maybe these are some questions I need to ask myself some more. And so, you know, having students to kind of think about, and not just my aspiring teachers, but our alumni as well. How have you been taught or learned about culturally relevant praxis? What's missing, overlooked, or underappreciated in the conversations that we need to have? And so the prompts, again, that you see on the screen there are some questions that I'm thinking about adding to some of the classroom discourse that we have in the class, like I said, such as knowing and learning, but it's not going to be restricted to knowing and learning, just to explore culturally relevant praxis more. And I'll give you all a chance to look at some of those different prompts there. And maybe there's additional questions that you would suggest that we ask about culturally relevant praxis. And I thought that those questions or prompts might be interested in getting the conversation started. When I mention behaviorism, for example, students will tell me, well, I had that in my psychology class or my ed psych class. I've had that in some other class, but students will have less experience studying and learning and talking about culturally relevant praxis. So I thought that these may be some prompts to get the conversation started and to see where my students are. And maybe there's some additional prompts or questions that you think that we can ask our aspiring teachers when it comes to this particular topic. And if so, feel free to add it to the chat or maybe say it aloud there. I've gotten to the point, particularly this semester, that I like to bring class to a closure by ending sometimes with these three prompts. What, so what, now what? They're not original to me. And that's the best thing about teachers. We get really great ideas from other teachers. And so I got to the point this semester, like I said, that I often will end the class with these prompts or some variation of it to see where my students are and to kind of see what big ideas or critical ideas they might have taken from our conversation in the interesting directions they go in. So I'm going to ask you all, and if you would like to share, either to speak aloud or to add into our chat. So we've had this conversation about culturally relevant praxis. Well, what's the what? The so what? Now what? Anyone want to add to any one of those particular prompts? And you don't have to go in, you can begin with now what? But just having this initial conversation. Anyone want to speak to one of those prompts? Maybe our conversation today, maybe there's another question you would like to pose, and it's not what, so what, or now what, or maybe you'd like to address one of the three that I have on the screen there. You can place it in the chat, or you could just say it aloud. And again, no requirements to address it. And even if you don't write anything in the chat or speak aloud about it, I would like you to, as you leave and you think about today's particular conversation, ask yourself, what, so what, now what? With this initial conversation about culturally relevant praxis.
Yolanda, we have
Yes.
one in the chat.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I can read it for you. It's just hard for you to see the chat with the presentation going. It says, now what? How can we leverage this for our entire alumni community?
Okay. Very, very good question. And so I'm going to share my ideas, and I would love for others to share their ideas as well. I think that beginning conversations such as this, where maybe an introduction for our alumni, I would probably say that for most of our alumni, thinking about the learning theories and the types of experiences that we have introduced our students to, I think that we have done, the UTeach program does have elements of it that are that would be related to culturally relevant praxis, even if we don't call it that. And I think that maybe we begin to use that explicit language, whether it's in our meetings with our alumni, and also have them to grapple with some of the questions that the teachers did. Ask these questions. What is a culturally relevant praxis to you? Why might that be important? And I think that just introducing those questions and having those conversations will get them to think about ways by which they can begin to reanimate their own science and math teaching and look at it from a different lens, that it is explicitly engaging the communities of their students and the strengths of their students. And whether they call it that language or not, that's what they're doing, that's what they can continue to do, and ways by which we can support them in doing that. Whether it is readings or maybe ways to tweak. You know, they have to get a brand new curriculum. What different voices or what voices from the community are you introducing? Whether it's a speaker or such as the Math of the Mountains, making sure that the context by which we're teaching our math and science very much reflects the students that are in the room, that math and science instruction has a face to it. And I think that those are ways by which we can begin with our alumni. Okay. Lakeisha said, now what? Get comfortable with the uncomfortable. That comes with teaching to the wholeness of our students and selves. Yes. Oh, and also about how do we use culturally relevant praxis to help those in crisis? Okay, and connecting with the alumni versus the seminar requirements, and going back to those our teachers that are in crisis. And I'm not sure the nature of the crisis, but of that specific apprentice teacher, but I think many of our teachers, whether they're apprentice teachers or they are alumni out there in the classroom, I think that crisis speaks to feeling maybe being overwhelmed, in feeling as if they're maybe not meeting the needs of their students. And please correct me if I'm making assumptions, but I think that for many of us and our alumni and our apprentice teachers or aspiring teachers, feeling overwhelmed about where to begin, how to continue to support our students. And I think one way is to know for them to be assured that they're doing their best, to go back to taking care of themselves and making small tweaks in terms of their teaching, and that the focus is on the students. And it doesn't have to be a brand new curriculum. Maybe in those math word problems that they're doing, maybe they're being mindful about what the context is. Maybe it's allowing students to ask questions about that science phenomena that they are teaching, and feeling less as if everything has to be focused on the teacher, and to trust that there's a lot of STEM learning and knowing that's very much within their students, what they bring to the classroom, and that there's resources in the community that will support them as well. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, Karen. When they are in crisis, I think you have to get at how they are framing their experience and find ways to help them reframe it. Yes. I agree. And what ideas, okay, and so Kathleen mentioned that teachers need the cultural connection to reach the students. If the content can be presented in a format to interest the students and gain their buy-in. I agree. And that could be the buy-in could be just the very stories that we bring into the classroom. One of the very teacher that I showed a quote about going to the Great Smoky Mountains. One of the things that she immediately did when she got back to her classroom is she changed the images of scientists in the classroom. Those were some of the small tweaks that she began to make when she got back to her own science classroom, is changing the images and the faces so that the students very much begin to see themselves in science. And so that was a way by which she interpreted the experience that they had at the Smokies in a way that she could contribute as well. And please let me know if I missed any other questions or comments. And also, if there are others, as we see the chat go by, if there's others that want to add to the questions or comments to answer it or to follow up as well. But I really like that idea of supporting our teachers in their care, the care of their students, and to reframe. And the comment that I often get sometimes from my aspiring teachers, they're like, yes, this is great. This is wonderful. I see how important this is, but I got to teach academic standard B1 to Z, whatever it might be, or they've got to get the content. And that's a part of reframing as well, that the students will still get the content, but culturally relevant praxis allows them to still have this rich STEM understanding and content and skills and processes. It is the way by which we frame it. We also reframe it too. And I felt very comfortable rewording the quote that you see there on the screen. And that could be a part of that reframing that we do for teachers to continue to be, to ask questions, to be thoughtful, to have those aha moments, and for us to have those conversations with each other. And are there any questions or comments for me? And I really appreciate you all continuing or with these conversations that I began to have with myself. And as I said, are beginning to broach with teachers as well, aspiring alumni and those in the classroom also. Any questions or comments for me, or any other lasting comments we would like to provide each other?
Well, one thing I would like to share is that we don't often watch the shows that the children watch or listen to the music that they listen to and things like that. And I think that that is a great way to gain some insight into their world. Mm-hmm. And that new movie, Bel Air, I actually argued with my partner about watching it, but then I kept watching it and he said, maybe I should turn this off. And I said, the only reason I'm watching this is because I feel so connected to it. Yes. You know, like you can see your childhood in these movies. And so I think that that's a great way to connect with students, even though it's hard to listen to rap and things like that. Sometimes I think at least we know what they're thinking, how they're thinking, and we can either support or dispel what needs to be addressed.
Yes, yes. And my daughter makes it a point that she'll say, I need to know shows like Euphoria, and I need to know about TikTok and all of that, because, and I get it, that's how they're communicating. And that's how they're sharing, and that's very much the world by which they're growing up in. And you're correct in that. That is one way to reframe it and to help us to make those connections.
Yeah, because everybody the boys connect with wear hoodies, and you know, there's a reason why we're having hoodie problems. So we have to be aware. In order, you have to identify the problem before you can fix it.
Exactly, exactly. Any other questions or comments or observations? Or ways that you imagine that you would begin to broach or continue the conversation with your aspiring teachers or alumni, or the teachers that that are mentoring our students? Oh, the Google form for a playlist request in our STEP courses. Okay, that's very creative as well. Yes.
We do a maker project at the end of our Step 1 course where we let them create anything they like to show their growth and experience in Step 1. And it's been amazing seeing what they come up with. You have no idea how creative your students are until you give the opportunity to just take the reins and show that off. And some of them write songs and make computer programs and do art. It's really beautiful to see that. Yes, so first of all, I want to thank Yolanda for the absolutely fantastic presentation. Virtual claps from everyone. It was so, I think there was a quote in the chat that says, we feel refocused, we feel, it was thought-provoking, and I want to echo those words. I know I'm going to leave with a lot of what's so what and now what's for myself. Thank you for spending your Friday with us. I know we all got a ton out of it, and we can't wait to see you at the next one. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.